It's the Summer 25 Quilt Along, and today I'm going to be talking about all their fabric options and details. Welcome to Epida Studio. My name is Elizabeth and I help you make beautiful things with quilting, Pojagi, and embroidery. And so we're jumping into the Summer 25 Quilt Along, where we're making projects based on my 1 block 4 ways pattern. And today I'm going to be talking all about fabric. So for this piece, you're going to be making blocks, and all your blocks are going to be the same pattern. So you'll want to think about which option you're making. The options are you can make 1 block, you can make 4 blocks, or you can make 20 blocks. And I'm going to be talking about that today. If you want to make a different number of blocks, you will easily be able to calculate how much fabric you will need. So for each block, the blocks are only made with 2.5 inch wide pieces. And so that's going to make it really easy if you're trying to use up scraps. Maybe you have pieces from a jelly roll. Maybe you have a jelly roll that you want to use. And so we can see in this block, I've used pieces left over from a jelly roll, and this one's kind of scrappy. But all the pieces are 2.5 inches wide. Now for quantity, if you're using scraps, you'll just have a bunch of scraps. But if you're cutting yardage, 2.5 inch wide strips are what you're going to need per block. And so you could do this whole piece with only 2 different fabrics. So this is a version of the block that was just made with 2 strips width of fabric. So you can see I had a strip of this green fabric and a strip of this light kind of beige gray print fabric. And so for each block, you're going to need 2 strips width of fabric. So for 1 block, you'll need 2 strips. For 4 blocks, you will need 8 2.5 inch strips. And then for 20 blocks, you will need 40 2.5 inch strips. Now, some pre-cut bundles have 40 strips in them. And so if you want to make a large piece and you have 2.5 inch pre-cut bundle, that might be the perfect quantity for what you need. Now, if you're using scraps, then that'll just give you a ballpark equivalent because you're going to be cutting your pieces, but it's 2 strips per block. Now, beyond the fabric for the blocks, you're probably going to want fabric for the borders and the sashing. So for the small 1 block piece, you're going to also need 2 3.5 inch strips, and that's going to be for the border. To make 4 blocks long or 4 blocks square, you're going to need around ½ a yard for the sashing and for the borders. And then for the very large piece with 20 blocks, you're going to need around 2 yards for the sashing and the borders for that piece. So when I get into construction, I'm going to give you the exact details of how large to cut your pieces, what your cutting is. But for now, that's the amount of fabric that you're going to need. In my other videos, I already talked a lot about what kind of fabrics you can use, and as you gathered, you can use a lot of different fabrics. So I would recommend you just look at what you have on hand and try that. So you can use quilting cotton, batik, flannel, linen, solids, prints. You can use pretty much anything. So feel free to try different things, but just start with what you have. But what if you have some pieces cut and it's kind of close to the size, but not exactly? Well, I am also going to be sharing videos in the future of how to adapt this block to different sizes. The standard block that I'm going to be giving is probably going to be around 11 inches. Yours might be a little bit different depending on the size of your seam allowance, but 11 inches is a good ballpark. And you're using things that are 2.5 inches wide. Well, in one example I'm going to show, I had these flannel squares that were 6 inches square. And when I thought about it, I didn't want to have to cut these down to be 2.5 inches wide and have the extra inch thrown away. So instead, I made a bigger block with 3-inch wide pieces, and so it made the same block. It was just a little bit bigger than the 11 inches. So I am also going to be giving instructions for how to make the block a different size if that's something that you want. So if you have a bunch of 3-inch strips you want to use, don't worry about trying to trim those all down to 2.5-inch strips. Wait until you see the video about making your block a different size, and you might decide to do that instead. So this is very adaptable and customizable. But for your basic block, you're going to need 2.5-inch strips for each block that you're going to make. If you have any questions about fabric requirements or comments, or you want to tell me what you're going to be using, then drop a comment and I'd love to hear it. Once you get your fabric chosen, the next thing we're going to talk about is thread, and that's going to be tomorrow's video.